down with his art column.
Oh, did he? Okay, cool.
You're like,
Alright, so does everyone have considered right now, or does anyone need more time?
We got it down.
Okay. Does anyone wanna share what they think it is?
to approve of or something or to approve of something or other.
Anyone else wanna share what they have?
Or to prove of someone's opinion. Considering.
So the definition I have is think about others' perspectives before giving an answer. So you're considering what they think, like you're considering what they think about something before making your own opinion. So, next. So today we're going to learn kind of overview about Black History Month. Alright, so what I want you to do is go ahead and write what you already know about Black History Month. So if I were to ask you, what is Black History Month, what would you tell someone? And we'll take a minute or two to do that real quick. Then we can stop so I have to restart it.
What was that? You using a pen?
There's a pen.
Oh my gosh.
You need another pencil.
Hold on.
There's one pen in
Sure.
that little thing too. I'm sure all your lead just flew out.
No, this is a pin.
Okay.
Okay, here it goes.
Oh, now it works? It needed to fly first?
Yeah.
Alright, cool.
You needed to fly. Mr. Green, you can't force me to do my work.
Yes, I can.
You can? Oh, I guess you can.
Do y'all need a few more minutes?
I need to know what I'm doing.
So you're writing what you already know about Black History Month. So like if I were to ask you, hey, what is Black History Month? What would you respond to me?
I don't know.
You don't know what Black History Month is? Alright, then we'll just go ahead and write that down. And then we'll discuss what it is.
Don't know what mine is.
Got it? Woo! Is anyone else done, or do I need some more time? You're done? Heather, you done? Okay, so this is a little history on where Black History Month all began. It was originally created in 1926 by a guy named Carter G. Woodson. Carter was an African-American historian, scholar, educator, and publisher. He believed that African Americans' contributions to society should be recognized and celebrated. They chose February because it was to celebrate the Black History Month, because Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass's birthday both fell on those dates. Does anyone know why they chose Abraham Lincoln? Well, no, he didn't have slaves. He ended He was part of ending slavery.
I've heard like someone said that he had slaves once before, but
Not that I know of. But he was the
I
president.
knew that he was
Mhm.
tried to abolish it. Or
Yeah.
What's it called?
Huh?
What's that called?
Abolish.
What did he do? What did he say to abolish it? What's it called? Starts with an E.
E.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Italian history, man. Emancipation.
Emancipation Proclamation.
Yep.
Good job. So he was the president during the time when they ended slavery. And then in 1976, it became a month-long celebration. So we're going to talk about 3 key people that have to do with Black History Month. So many of you have probably heard about Martin Luther King Jr. He was a very important person in our history, and we just had a couple weekends ago to celebrate him. He was a Baptist minister from Georgia. If y'all have ever heard the speech, I Have a Dream, he created it. He was one of the most influential voices in the American Civil Rights Movement, and he also led many nonviolent protests for civil rights for African American citizens. Rosa Parks was a civil rights activist from Alabama. During this time period, African American citizens had to give up their seat on a bus if it was overcrowded, and they'd have to move to the back. However, she had just finished a long day of work and did not want to get up, and so she refused to give up her seat to a white passenger at the time. This sparked the Montgomery bus boycott. Rosa Parks was arrested, and this was one of a very big turning point in the end of segregation in public places. Does anyone know what segregation is?
Separation.
Mm-hmm. So what was segregation during this time period?
Whites and blacks were segregated.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of public places did not allow whites and blacks to be in the same place. Like they had a lot of restrooms for public restrooms. There were certain restrooms for whites and certain restrooms for blacks, and so during this time they were very segregated.
Yeah, like the black people had to sit at the back of the bus and white people had to sit in the front.
Mm-hmm.
What's that woman name again?
Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this was her who originally was sitting in the front and got arrested for not moving. Carter G. Woodson, who we mentioned earlier, he was the one who realized that African Americans should be recognized for their contributions. He was a historian from Virginia. He wanted to, like I said, he wanted to focus attention on good things that African Americans have done in society. And then he originally founded Black History Month in 1926. However, it was originally only celebrated for a week. It became a national holiday or national month-long celebration in 1976. And then I have a short little video just on Black History Month. Oh, there's that.
There's no such thing as a perfect writer. This is why I use Grammarly to check my work.
If I'm
Hey,
putting
can I
comments,
ask, and whoever made that thing could not have.
February is Black History Month. But why? Where did Black History Month come from? It began with this man, Carter G. Woodson, a historian and writer. Woodson noticed that his people were, quote, overlooked, ignored, and even suppressed by the writers of history textbooks and the teachers who use them, end quote. So he started a Black History Week in 1926. And people celebrated it enthusiastically. They started Black History clubs, and teachers started recognizing the contributions of Black Americans in their classrooms. He chose February February, by the way, because it held the birthdays of both Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, two men he believed had done tremendous work for the rights and liberties of African Americans. It took another 50 years, though, for Black History Month to become officially recognized by our government. The president at the time, Gerald Ford, said that we should seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. Here's the funny thing, though. Carter G. Woodson hoped that someday people would no longer celebrate Black History Month. He saw the day when it would no longer be necessary, when finally we would see Black history in America for what it really is, an essential part of American history.
So after watching that video, why do you think we celebrate Black History Month?
Because it was good, right?
To uphold achievements, what people and what men and women have done in their time to accomplish.
And why did it say that he was hoping that it would not always be celebrated?
Because he wanted to teach Black people a lesson, to teach them that they have rights too, that they should be upheld.
Yeah. It also mentioned that he was hoping that it wouldn't always be needed, because he was hoping at one point you'd recognize the contributions all the time instead of just having to focus on 1 month. But yeah. So, do you have the article? So we're gonna read an article, and then you're gonna create a CER after on the article.
Your favorite.
Woo!
Is it?
So,
So is it?
yes, it's always your favorite. So the prompt I'll read it again after y'all read the article, but what you want to be paying attention to while you're reading it is, do you think that Black History Month is the only time that Black innovation and contributions are celebrated? So do you think it's only celebrated during that month, or do you think that it's celebrated year round? Okay. Black history museums and historic sites are thriving across the South. They're riding a wave of interest in African American history that's made a stunning success of the 2-year-old National Museum of African American History and Culture in the nation's capital. In the past year, museums documenting the civil rights struggle and memorializing lynching victims have opened in Jackson, Mississippi, and Montgomery, Alabama. In Nashville, Tennessee, a museum focusing on African American music is scheduled to open next year. In Charleston, South Carolina, construction is set to begin next year on a projected $75 million Black History Museum. It will stand on the former site of Gadsden's Wharf, the disembarking point for more than 100,000 Africans sold into slavery in the United States. At a time when attendance at some large museums is flagging, 12 of the 20 biggest U.S. museums saw flat or lower attendance in 2017 compared with 2016. The swirl of activity involving Black history stands out. National Park Memorial to Harriet Tubman. In Church Creek, Maryland, a 1-year-old 17-acre state national park memorializes the place where Harriet Tubman was born and enslaved. Tubman escaped slavery and later helped many others escape too. The park was expected to draw 75,000 visitors its first year. However, it attracted 100,000. Meanwhile, curators have rewritten exhibits at sites such as Mount Vernon and Monticello, the homes of President George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, respectively. They've also added buildings to teach visitors about the lives of enslaved people who worked on the plantations. Relevant history is inclusive history. Everyone is racing to do that, said John Ditchell, president of the American Association for State and Local History. Historical institutions are all working on emphasizing the history of civil rights and the history of race relations and the history of slavery. It's a priority. History professionals cite several factors for increased interest. These include the availability of more federal money, Barack Obama's presidency, and the 50th anniversary of many civil rights milestones. The Black Lives Matter movement, controversies over Confederate monuments, protests by NFL players, and last year's violence in Charlottesville, Virginia, have also made a difference. These activities have prompted more Americans to deal with how identity, race, and national pride affects them. According to Brian Carter, president of the Association of African American Museums based in Washington, D.C. The country is changing. It's looking at itself in different ways than it has historically, Carter said. Museums help people make meaning of their own experiences. New federal money has also helped. In 2016, the National Park Service began giving grants to African American historical sites for employees in programming and research, though not for construction. This year, the Park Service awarded $12.6 million in grants to 51 projects in 24 states, up to $7.8 million in grants to 39 projects in 2017. Last summer, the National Trust for Historic Preservation announced a $25 million grant campaign to support important African American sites. One site, for instance, is jazz great John Coltrane's New York home. The new museums and historic sites would be happy to achieve a fraction of the success of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. That museum, which occupies a prime location on the National Mall, drew 2.4 million visitors in 2017, making it one of the 10 most visited museums in the United States. The museum, which is part of the Smithsonian Institution, raised the bar of awareness around African American history in museums, said Michael Bower Moore, president of Charleston, South Carolina's International African American Museum. This history has largely been muted forever, and now this history has been coming out. Now African Americans and Americans broadly are just curious. When the National Museum opened, we thought that it might have the impact of sucking all of the air out of the room. Just the opposite, Moore said. Instead, it has jump-started more presentations of Black history. There are art museums everywhere, and there are history museums everywhere. I see it as really healthy that there will be African American museums everywhere. States also are investing to promote civil rights tourism. Prompted in part by the 50th anniversaries of seminal events of the 1960s, 14 southern state tourism agencies in January unveiled a website detailing stops on what they are calling the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. It lists about 130 destinations, including the Woolworths Lunch Counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, which was the site of the first sit-in protest by Black students. Obama declared national monuments at civil rights historic sites in Birmingham and Anniston, Alabama, before leaving office. Now buildings at those sites, the A.G. Gaston Motel in Birmingham and the Greyhound bus station in Anniston, where freedom riders were attacked in 1961, are being restored with local and federal funds. President Donald Trump last month designated his first national monument near Lexington, Kentucky, where Blacks fled during the Civil War to join the Union Army, where their families lived in refugee settlements and sought emancipation. His administration also has been expanding the African American Civil Rights Network of historic sites. The South Carolina African American Heritage Commission last year created a Green Book mobile app including 300 historic African American sites in the state. The app is named for the Jim Crow era guides for Black travelers that detailed safe places for food and lodging. Cultural tourism, or heritage tourism, is one of the fastest growing markets in the country, said Janet Harriet, vice chairman of the South Carolina Commission. But nothing that we do is limited to Black people. Sometimes I think white people are more interested in our history than we are. then they show up to conferences, they want the information, and sometimes, I know it's for economic reasons, because they know where the trend is now. Alright, so that kind of gave a good summary of how Black history has kind of blown up in the past few years. They've been able to integrate more into society by having these museums and such, okay? So what you guys are gonna work on is, acclaim evidence and reasoning of the do you think that Black History Month is the only time that Black innovation and contributions are celebrated? Okay, so remember your claim is your opinion, find something in the article that proves your opinion, and then state how it relates to each other. You only have to come up with one claim and at least 2 pieces of evidence. That's all I'm asking for, okay?
Can I do it on Google Docs?
Yeah, you can, do it on Google Docs and share it with me. Okay?